Do you believe that even the worst outlaw can find redemption with a single act of courage? It seems impossible to imagine that a man marked by crime, violence, and the fear he spread could have his story transformed by an unexpected decision. But in the heart of the Old West, where the line between justice and revenge was thin and often stained with blood, something happened that surprised even the toughest gunslingers. A bullet fired not to kill, but to save, marked the beginning of a journey no one could have predicted. And it is this story that I want to share with you today. The Old West has always been a stage for legends, stories of fearless sheriffs, duels at sunset, and men who chose to live outside the law. Many of them were feared, hunted, and hated. But were they all really doomed to forever carry the weight of their mistakes? Could even the most cruel of criminals find a chance for redemption? What you're about to discover may surprise you. Imagine a small town surrounded by dust, noisy saloons, and a tension that lingered in the air with every arrival of a stranger. In this setting, an outlaw known for the trail of destruction he left behind walked alone, carrying not only his weapons, but also the shadow of a past that seemed impossible to erase. He was feared by all, avoided even by the bravest, and every glance of contempt only reinforced his status as a public enemy. Have you ever felt that way? As if no one believes you could change? But destiny in the Old West was unpredictable. It only took a second, a gesture, for the story of a man to be written in a completely different way. It was on an ordinary day, when the sun blazed high and the dust rose through the streets, that something happened that would change everything. Amidst shouts and gunshots, an innocent person was about to become the victim of a violence they didn't deserve. And it was then, in that moment, when everyone expected yet another atrocity, that this outlaw made a decision that would shock everyone. The curious thing is, no one expected this. After all, how could anyone believe that someone marked by so many mistakes would risk his life to protect someone who had nothing to do with him? How could one accept that a criminal, so hated and hunted, could act with compassion? This was the point when the image of the villain began to be questioned. And perhaps it was also the moment when he himself began to see himself differently. Stay with me until the end, because understanding how this transformation happened may change the way you view not only the stories of the Old West, but also real life. The power of this story lies not just in the firing of a gun, but in the impact that one decision can have on someone's life. A choice that seemed insignificant to some was, in fact, the starting point of an unexpected redemption. In the Old West, where the law was harsh and mercy rare, this gesture showed that even in the driest desert, a seed of change can sprout. And this is where the true journey of this man begins, marked by suspicious glances, relentless judgments, and at the same time, the possibility of proving that courage is not just in pulling the trigger, but in choosing a different path. From that moment on, his life would never be the same again. And maybe it's at this point in the story that I want to hear your voice too, because every person who listens to a narrative like this brings with them a unique experience, a personal reflection on what change, courage, and redemption really mean. If this topic makes sense to you, leave a comment here about what touched you the most so far. It could be a memory, an opinion, or even a question. Believe me, when you share what you feel, you create a living space for exchange, not just a solitary video on the screen. And since we're walking together on this journey, the simple act of liking this video makes a huge difference. It might seem small, but every like shows that this content is worthwhile, that it should continue to exist and reach more people who may need to hear exactly this message. And if you feel that these stories of the Old West, full of emotion, mystery, and life lessons, speak directly to you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the upcoming chapters, and you'll help keep this community united. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content, creating a ripple effect that goes far beyond what we imagine. Because in the end, every comment, every subscription, and every like are not just numbers, they are signs that this journey makes sense, that it stirs something in you. And just like the outlaw who began to discover a new path from a single gesture, it is also with your small gestures that this story continues to be told. The Old West was a territory where every decision could mean life or death, where the dust in the streets carried the echo of heavy footsteps and suspicious glances. There were no organized courts like we know today, nor impartial judges ready to hear both sides of the story. There, justice was often done by the hands of the people themselves, based on reputations and fears, and the law was represented by ruthless sheriffs who needed to enforce respect at any cost. But among these men of the law, there were also those who, behind the scenes, took advantage of the chaos to gain power, show strength, and manipulate the fate of many. The hidden truth of the West was precisely this. It wasn't just about outlaws against sheriffs, but a network of decisions and interests that shaped the fate of entire towns. Imagine a small town, lost in the middle of nowhere, where every newcomer sparked curiosity and at the same time fear. People lived between smoky saloons, card games that ended in violent brawls, and duels that erupted in the middle of the main street, without warning. In this setting, violence was more than just a detail. It was part of the routine. And those who survived in this environment knew they needed to develop a different mindset, a way of looking at the world with constant attention, because at any moment, a stray bullet could change everything. And it was in this environment that our outlaw built his reputation. He wasn't just another bandit trying to rob stagecoaches or invade banks. His name circulated as a synonym for danger, like a shadow walking among the living. For many, he represented chaos itself, a constant reminder that life in the West offered no guarantees. But behind this image of a feared criminal, there was something few could see. A man trapped by the consequences of his own choices, someone who no longer knew if there was a way to change. It's at this point that we begin to realize that, no matter how hard life was, transformation was possible, even in the most unlikely places. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the Old West wasn't just a stage for shootouts and robberies. It was a true human laboratory, where every revelation about character and courage appeared in the most unexpected moments. There, the impact of decisions was evident in seconds, and there was no room for prolonged disguises. An act of kindness could surprise just as much as a well-aimed shot, and it was this mix of brutality and humanity that made every story so unforgettable. The outlaw, who until then was only seen as a villain, began to be viewed differently after a specific act. But to understand the power of this gesture, we need to understand the cultural weight of that time. Living in the West meant living with the constant feeling that tomorrow might never come. Because of this, people judged quickly, condemned without mercy, and clung to first impressions. And that's why the idea of redemption seemed almost impossible. A man marked by crime had no chance of erasing his reputation. But what would happen when this same man challenged his own fate? The truth is, at that time, no one was prepared to deal with a change in mindset from someone considered lost. It was easier to maintain the narrative that certain men were just born for evil, but life likes to prove the opposite. And it was in this context of tension, dust, and fear that an act emerged that defied logic and opened the door to a new perspective. An act that showed that even the greatest villains carry within them a spark capable of changing the course of their story. And it is precisely in this contrast that this narrative gains strength, a land marked by harshness and violence, yet still leaving room for the unexpected revelation of courage, compassion, and choice. And it is in this harsh terrain, full of risks and judgments, that we'll dive even deeper, following the steps of a man who carried the weight of social condemnation, but dared to challenge the label that held him, Jack Rowan. That was the name that made even the bravest swallow hard when they heard it in a conversation. Each wanted poster showed his hard face, marked by dust and the desert sun, accompanied by a bounty so high that many bounty hunters lost their lives trying to capture him. His fame spread across entire towns, arriving before him like a silent warning that peace was about to be shattered. Where Jack Rowan passed, only fear and silence remained. Doors were closed, windows locked, and even the bravest avoided making eye contact. But what made Jack so feared wasn't just his crimes. It was the certainty that he hesitated for nothing. There was no law, no authority, no morality that could stop him. He had faced sheriffs, robbed stagecoaches, and survived ambushes that would have taken anyone else down. To many, Rowan wasn't a man. He was a dark legend, almost a living curse of the West. Yet behind this mask of hardness and cruelty, there was something few could imagine. Jack Rowan wasn't born an outlaw. At some point in his story, there was a boy who believed in a simple life, perhaps even in a different future. But the Old West wasn't a place for innocence. A series of losses, betrayals, and injustices shaped his mindset until he became exactly what others said about him, a relentless bandit. That's how Jack became a prisoner of his own name. At that time, society didn't believe in second chances. If someone was labeled a criminal, that label became an eternal sentence. And Jack Rowan carried that mark as if it were part of his skin. It was easier to fear him than to try to understand the reasons that led him to become who he was. Even those who followed him during his escapes were nothing more than temporary accomplices, men who got close because of the promise of easy money, but abandoned him at the first opportunity. Deep down, Jack knew he had no friends, only fragile alliances. The price of his reputation was loneliness. The impact of this was that Rowan began to believe in his own condemnation. He started living as though there were no other path, as if it were too late for any change. He became a character in his own dark legend, feeding the fear others felt about him. And even when the silence of the night made him remember what he had lost, it was easier to continue down the path of crime than to face the pain of the past. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because it is precisely in this contrast between the man everyone saw and the human being hidden behind the reputation of a bandit that the true power of this story begins to emerge. Jack Rowan was the perfect villain for the history books of the West, but his journey held a revelation no one could have expected. He carried with him a mark that seemed impossible to erase. The past was always lurking, like a shadow that never left his trail. Each crime committed, every thoughtless decision, every choice made in the heat of survival turned into scars that were not only on his body, but more importantly, on his soul. His tarnished reputation was like an invisible seal stamped on his forehead, preceding him wherever he went. No matter where he went, the memory of the evil he had spread always arrived before him, as if the world had decided that his identity was forever tied to those mistakes. And it's curious how society feeds off of these stories. The newspapers of the time printed his name not as a man, but as a symbol of danger. He stopped being a person and became a distorted legend, reduced to a dark character that fueled collective fear. In conversation halls, around campfires, or even in noisy taverns, his figure was evoked with both fascination and repulsion. He was the example of what one should not follow, the portrait of condemnation that life itself made sure to announce. Yet, no one asked about the circumstances, the backstage of this journey. Few cared to understand the hidden truth behind the headlines, because it was easier to reduce someone to a label than to face the complexity of their decisions. And so, in the eyes of the world, he was simply the outlaw. This weight wasn't limited to the collective memory, but it also affected his own mindset. When everyone around you starts to see you as a monster, there is a dangerous risk. Believing it yourself, it's like an invisible prison, where the key to freedom always seems to be in someone else's hands. He walked the roads carrying not just the weapons that sustained him, but also the suffocating feeling that his fate was already written, with no right to revise it. Transformation, though desired in some forgotten corner of his conscience, seemed unattainable. With every attempt to look forward, the reflection of the past pulled him back, reminding him of choices that had become invisible chains. And here lies an uncomfortable truth. When you're only remembered for the harm you've done, there's no space left to be recognized for the good you could still build. This is the hardest, cruelest prison, because there are no bars, but there is constant judgment, an eternal court that never dissolves. The impact of this was devastating. In a world where your name was synonymous with reputation, all he had was a trail of fear and rejection. Doors didn't open, suspicious glances followed him, and even those who once claimed to be allies knew that at some point they might betray him to save their own skin. It's this feeling of being condemned to loneliness that corrodes the most deeply. It's not just the lack of forgiveness from others, but the difficulty of forgiving oneself, because on some level he also believed that maybe he didn't deserve anything more than the darkness surrounding him. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the weight of the past isn't just a story about him, but also about us. We all carry guilt, regrets, decisions that have marked us and in some way seem to define who we are. The danger lies in believing that these labels are definitive, that the journey ends in the mistake, and that there is no room for rebuilding. This is the same dilemma he faced, trapped between the memory of what he had done and the silent hope for a different future. It was as if time had slowed down. The dry sound of the first gunshot echoed through the saloon, and suddenly the noise of conversations and laughter stopped, giving way to a suffocating silence. The dust suspended in the air seemed frozen, and all eyes turned to the door, where tension took shape. There, in the middle of that chaotic scene, an innocent life was at risk. He wasn't part of the game, didn't carry a weapon, didn't seek revenge. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it is precisely here that the story shifts, because his presence becomes a turning point. The danger was no longer just between hardened men of the West, but about the weight of a choice. Let violence consume one more life, or intervene, even if it came at a high cost. The outlaw, Jack Rowan, was not known for acting predictably. His reputation came from precisely that, the fact that he never followed the expected rules, surprising both allies and enemies alike. But in that moment, something in his gaze revealed that he was facing a different crossroads. It wasn't about honor, it wasn't about revenge, and it wasn't about territory. It was about deciding whether he would carry in his conscience the blood of someone who had nothing to do with that dispute. And that's the fascinating part. When the tension is so great that even the toughest of men is confronted with his own humanity. The crowd watched in shock, unsure whether to run or stay trapped in the spectacle of imminent danger. Each second carried with it the feeling that something decisive was about to happen. The metallic sound of guns being drawn, the creaking of the wooden floor, the anxious glances trying to guess what the next move would be. And at the center of it all, Jack's figure took on even more enigmatic contours. He could simply turn his back and maintain his reputation as a cold, calculating man. But there was something different hanging in the air, as if the innocent's life were acting as a mirror, reflecting back to Jack a part of himself that he didn't want to face. The unexpected wasn't just in the gunfight, but in the silent transformation happening within that man. Because see, there are moments in life when the choice isn't just practical or strategic, but deeply moral. These are the moments that become revelations, not just for those who live them, but for all who witness them. And the hidden truth is that in extreme situations, you can't hide behind the mask you wear every day. The impact comes from what you didn't plan to reveal. Jack knew that any decision would have irreversible consequences. If he intervened, he could change how everyone saw him. He would stop being just the feared outlaw and become something no one expected. If he ignored it, he would reinforce the hard image he had cultivated, but would carry a silent weight that he might never be able to shake off. That was the real backdrop of that moment. It wasn't just a shootout, it was an internal clash between what he had been up to that point and what he could become from there on. And when the dust seemed to choke the air, the minds of everyone in that saloon were filled with questions that would never be voiced aloud. How far can someone go without completely losing their humanity? What is the line between survival and transformation? Jack's journey was about to cross a point of no return, and no one in that room could imagine the impact that choice would have, not just on the innocent in danger, but on the very history of that man. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this moment is not just about the Old West, nor about pointed guns or who's going to pull the trigger first. It's about decisions that, in the span of seconds, change everything you think about yourself and reveal hidden layers that had been kept. Until then, Jack Rowan's heart was pounding faster, but in a way different from all the other times. It wasn't the fear of capture or the impulse to survive that guided his movements. It was something deeper, almost imperceptible, but impossible to ignore. For a moment, he allowed himself to look into the eyes of the innocent, who trembled in the middle of the saloon, surrounded by bullets that had no intention of sparing him. And in that gaze, there was something that cut through the remaining hardness in Jack, a hidden truth he could no longer ignore, that life so fragile and innocent didn't deserve to be erased by the chaos he carried within his own past. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it's at this point that the story reveals the power of transformation and the impact that a single decision can have. Jack Rowan, the man who until then seemed made of steel and darkness, felt something different unfold inside him. Every crime, every mistake from the past Every silent judgment he carried seemed to conspire to make him continue being just the feared outlaw. But for the first time, his mindset began to change. It wasn't courage in the conventional sense, nor physical strength. It was the courage to challenge his own destiny, to question the narrative that everyone, including himself, believed to be immutable. With the gun in his hand, time seemed to stretch. Each second brought with it a tension so palpable, it was as if the air itself carried the weight of the consequences. Jack could choose to ignore the innocent's danger and keep his reputation intact, or he could act unexpectedly, opening up space for something he never thought possible within himself: redemption. And then, in a quick, precise, and unexpected movement, he fired. The bullet cut through the air with a whistle that seemed more like a whisper of truth than a noise of violence. The impact was immediate, but not destructive. It hit what needed to be hit to protect, to save, to break the cycle that seemed inevitable. The effect on everyone in the saloon was immediate. Some didn't believe what they saw. Others, in disbelief, felt a profound strangeness. How could the feared Jack Rowan, the outlaw no one dared face, act in such an unexpected way, choosing to save rather than destroy? This choice wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about the shot that hit its mark. It was an act of moral courage, a decision that altered the very course of his story. And here lies the true revelation. Transformation doesn't begin when circumstances change, but when someone chooses to act differently, even against everything that seems determined. In that moment, the perception Jack had of himself began to transform. He realized he no longer needed to be defined only by the mistakes of his past, that even the most rejected, most feared, most marked by the harm he had caused could still choose a path of positive impact. And the effect of this gesture wasn't limited to the innocent's life. It also reverberated inside him, awakening a feeling he hadn't felt in years: the possibility of redemption, of rebuilding, of becoming something greater than his reputation as a bandit. The behind the scenes of this moment is revealing. It wasn't a planned act or an attempt to cleanse his conscience. It was the essence of Jack Rowan's journey manifesting in a concrete way, showing that true change doesn't depend on applause or immediate recognition, but on the firm decision to act in alignment with what one believes is right, even when everything around suggests the opposite. The innocent's reaction, the expression of relief, and the silent understanding in Jack's eyes were more powerful than any newspaper narrative, more impactful than any reward someone could offer. And it's in this moment that the story makes something clear that we often forget. Our choices can redefine not just our reputation, but also our essence, revealing hidden layers and opening paths once thought impossible. The silence that followed Jack Rowan's shot was almost deafening. For a few seconds, no one dared breathe loudly, as if the air itself had frozen before what had just happened. The innocent, still trembling, lifted his eyes and met Jack's gaze. And in that moment, something deeper than gratitude passed between them. The realization that this man, so feared and cruel, was capable of something no one imagined. Mouths opened, glances met, and the weight of surprise lingered over everyone, filling every corner of the saloon with tension and disbelief. It was impossible for anyone there not to feel the impact of it. Jack, the outlaw, the name that carried the shadow of fear and destruction, had just acted unexpectedly. For the first time, his reputation built on violence and terror began to be questioned. How could someone feared by all, who showed no mercy in his past actions, choose to save instead of destroy? This contrast between what he had always represented and what he had just done seemed to disarm everyone's perception, creating a kind of emotional reverberation that no one could ignore. Despite the act, distrust didn't vanish completely. The human mind tends to cling to familiar narratives, and Jack Rowan was the perfect example of this. It was natural for some to still look at him warily, unable to immediately shake off the fear his dark legend provoked. But there was a crack, a tiny opening in the wall of judgment that had kept him isolated for years. And it's exactly this crack that signals something deeper: the possibility of rebuilding, the chance for real transformation that emerges not from speeches or promises, but from concrete and unexpected actions. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the immediate consequences of a choice like this go far beyond what is visible. It's not just about how others begin to view Jack, but the silent impact it has inside him as well. Each act of moral courage, each decision made, against the world's expectations, acts as an invisible force that reshapes the mindset and opens up space for a new journey. It's at this moment that transformation begins to reverberate, not just on the external plane, but in the backstage of the consciousness of those who dare to act differently. The effect of this is almost cinematic, but also profoundly human. That moment of collective shock is just the external reflection of an internal battle that unfolds quietly but powerfully. Jack Rowan realized that he could be more than the man everyone believed they knew, and that his choices could alter the course of his own story. Every suspicious glance cast at him also carried a contained curiosity, a silent expectation about what he would do next. And it is this duality, between fear and surprise, between the old reputation and the new perception, that reveals the strength of an unexpected decision and its lasting impact. It's fascinating to realize how a single act, in a moment that seems fleeting, can trigger a chain of effects that shapes not only the external narrative, but also the backstage of the very soul. The reactions of everyone there, a mix of disbelief, fear, and restrained admiration, are just the beginning of something greater. And Jack, once an absolute villain, begins to walk towards a silent redefinition, one that still requires courage, reflection, and the willingness to face hidden truths about himself and the world around him. The shot that saved the innocent was just the first step, almost imperceptible, but loaded with meaning that Jack Rowan was starting to understand on a deep level. Until that moment, his life had seemed like an inevitable cycle of crime, fear, and loneliness, but something had changed inside him. The feeling that once came from power through terror now transformed into a kind of silent responsibility, an awakening awareness of the real impact his actions could have on others. The change didn't come from an abstract thought, nor from a promise of redemption made in silence. It came from the concrete experience, the realization that he could choose another path, and that this choice, however small, had the power to transform the reality around him. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what happened in that shootout is a clear example of how a mindset can be redefined from decisions that, at first glance, seem small, but carry immense impact. Jack Rowan, the man who once only inspired fear, began to realize that true strength wasn't in intimidating or dominating, but in protecting, in acting with awareness, even when it went against everything his reputation suggested. Every act of kindness, every choice to help instead of harm, served as a silent brick in the reconstruction of his own identity. He slowly discovered that true transformation doesn't happen immediately or in grand gestures, but in the details, in the backstage of the small actions that show, to himself and to others, that it is possible to be more than the mistakes of the past. Jack began to walk through towns and villages, no longer just as an outlaw, but as someone who carried stories of care, silent intervention, and protection. With each life he touched, with each unexpected act of solidarity, he reinforced to himself the reality that he could change, that what everyone believed to be immutable in his essence didn't have to define his future. The transformation, he realized, begins when we take responsibility for our choices, when we understand that every decision carries consequences, not only for ourselves but for everyone around us. It's fascinating to observe how Jack naturally began to distance himself from the criminal life. It wasn't a forced abandonment, nor an escape from enemies or the law. It was an internal movement, driven by the discovery that there was another kind of impact he could make. He began to act as a mediator in disputes, to intervene for those in danger, to share his experience so others wouldn't fall into the same mistakes he had made. This journey of redemption was silent but powerful, and it revealed that even the most hardened of hearts, bearing scars from decades, could start a reconstruction that touched not only his life but the lives of all who crossed his path. The effect of this wasn't just social, but also psychological. Jack realized that by helping, by acting with empathy, he was rescuing parts of himself he thought were lost forever. Each act of kindness served as a mirror, reflecting back to him a possible version of himself that was no longer based on fear or revenge, but on awareness, responsibility, and moral courage. And it's at this point that the true journey reveals itself. Redemption is not just about being seen differently by others, but about seeing oneself differently, discovering the strength that lies in the decision to transform your own life. With every step he took, Jack Rowan discovered that the story everyone knew about him, the feared outlaw legend, could coexist with a new narrative, silent and powerful, built through concrete acts of courage and humanity. This transformation didn't erase the past, but rewrote it, showing that even in the harshest Old West, there was room for change, for deep revelations, and for a true journey of impact. What makes Jack Rowan's story so powerful is not just the fact that he was a feared outlaw, but what it reveals about human nature and the possibility of transformation. In the Old West, where the law was harsh and often non-existent, where violence dictated the rules and survival required extreme decisions, few could imagine that someone with Jack's history could act unexpectedly. And yet, he showed that even in the toughest and most unyielding circumstances, redemption is possible. It's not about the number of mistakes made or the dark past we carry, but about the courage to make a different decision when everything seems lost. It's a reminder that no one is condemned forever, that even in the most extreme situations, there is an opportunity for reconstruction, to prove that it is possible to act with humanity. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the real lesson goes beyond the heroic act or the surprise of everyone who witnessed the shootout. What Jack teaches us is that transformation starts with a moment of awareness, a decision that arises within us before manifesting in the external world. He could have ignored the innocent, keeping intact the reputation of fear he had cultivated for years. But by choosing to act, he revealed something essential. That change depends on no one but ourselves. It's a hidden truth we often forget, that every decision, no matter how small it may seem, carries the power to create a profound impact, both on the lives of others and on the journey of the one who chooses to act. The effect of this gesture reverberates like an echo that goes far beyond the instant when the bullet hit its target. It transforms perceptions, alters destinies, and above all, changes mindsets. Jack Rowan didn't just save someone's life. He began to save his own life, his reputation, and his heart hardened by the past. Each subsequent act of kindness, each choice to protect, to help, or to intervene for others, served as a silent revelation for him and for those who watched him. Redemption is not an abstract concept or an unreachable prize, but something built with courage, decision, and consistency. At its core, the message behind this story is universal. In any era, even in extreme contexts like the Old West, people have the capacity to reinvent themselves, to choose a new narrative, and to transform their impact on the world. It's not just about heroism or reputation, but about personal truth and the willingness to face one's past with honesty. It's about understanding that our actions have power and that each moment is an opportunity to write a new version of ourselves. Jack Rowan is living proof of this, an example that even the most hardened, the most judged, or the most rejected can begin a journey of redemption with a single act of courage. This story invites us to reflect on our own choices, on the moments when we can decide to act differently, even when everything around us pushes us to stay in routine, inertia, or the cycle of mistakes. True transformation doesn't depend on external recognition, but on the internal courage to do what is right, to challenge norms, and to create positive impact even if it's silent. It's a life lesson that transcends time and context, reminding us that every conscious decision, no matter how unexpected, can be the turning point that redefines everything. What makes Jack Rowan's story so unforgettable is not just the isolated heroic act, but the entire journey he embarked upon after that shot that changed everything. He walked through dusty trails, small towns and villages where everyone knew his name. But few could imagine that the man feared for decades was now capable of such unexpected choices. Every step he took carried a mixture of caution, reflection, and a quiet curiosity about what it would be like to be seen differently. Not as the outlaw everyone feared, but as someone capable of transforming the impact of his own life. It was a slow process, made up of small decisions, subtle but powerful gestures, revealing how true transformation begins backstage, in the mind and consciousness of those who choose to change. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Jack's journey shows us something that goes far beyond the fiction of the Old West. He learned that every choice, every action taken with the intention to protect, to help, or to repair, is an opportunity to reframe the past and create a new narrative for oneself. The mentality that once focused on survival and fear now expanded to empathy, responsibility, and moral courage. And it's precisely at this point that we realize that redemption is not an abstract or distant concept. It manifests in everyday decisions, in the willingness to face our own hidden truths, in the silent impact that every act can have on the lives of others, and, most importantly, on our own. The Old West, with its harshness and unrelenting laws, serves as the perfect backdrop for this reflection, because it shows that change doesn't depend on external circumstances. Jack Rowan could have remained the villain of the story, the feared man who only responded to the cycle of violence surrounding him. But he chose differently. Every person around him, every witness to his transformation, began to see previously invisible nuances, an attentive gaze, a gesture of help, a silent intervention that saved lives. And even though initial distrust persisted, something stronger was emerging, the proof that character can be rebuilt, even when everything suggests otherwise, even when the past weighs like a shadow almost impossible to dispel. The impact of his journey reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. That genuine transformation comes from within, from the conscious decision not to repeat destructive patterns, to open up to revelations that, however subtle, have the power to redefine an entire life. Jack became living proof that no one is permanently tied to the stories others tell about us, or even to those we write ourselves with our own mistakes. Every choice made with positive intent is a brick that rebuilds reputation, mindset, and above all, the very essence. And that's why this story resonates so deeply. It's not just about an outlaw from the Old West. It's about all of us. About the moments when we need to decide between staying on the known path, even if it's destructive, or daring to change, even without guarantees, facing fear and inner doubts. Jack Rowan's courage proves that even in the darkest heart, light can be born, that redemption can begin. With a single gesture that seems small, but carries consequences that reverberate throughout life. And so we reach the end of this journey through Jack Rowan's story, a man who taught us that courage and transformation can arise even in the most unexpected places, even in an Old West marked by fear and violence. If you followed every detail, felt the tension, the surprise, and the impact of each decision, leave a comment. I'm with you until the end. It will be amazing to see who truly connected with this message, and it also helps create a space for exchange, where every experience and reflection counts. If this story touched you in some way, give a like to the video. It's a simple but powerful way to show that the content we've prepared makes sense, and that together we're building something transformative. Your gesture comes back to you in the form of more stories, more knowledge, and more inspiration, because the more we engage, the more the channel can bring moving accounts like this one, full of lessons and revelations. And if you're not part of this community yet, subscribing here is more than just clicking a button. It's choosing to continue this journey of discoveries, diving into stories that stir the mind and the heart, and allowing each narrative to transform the way we view courage, redemption, and choices in real life. Each subscription helps strengthen this space, allowing more people to hear stories that are truly worth telling. There's another story right here next to this one that will truly move you, full of twists and lessons. Click and continue with me over there. With each story, each character, you'll see how unexpected decisions can change everything. Sometimes, a single action is enough to transform not only someone's life, but also our own perception of courage and redemption.